She had to stop the ruin. Approaching the most vicious, untouchable duke in London was a terrifying gamble. To save her sister, Lady Vivian proposed a wicked bargain, a fake courtship to deceive high society. He agreed to be her shield. Now, bound together in crowded ballrooms, they are forced to whisper and touch. But beneath the ruthless lies, a fierce, undeniable heat awakens, and this dangerous game might shatter them both. The terrifying gamble had begun to take shape only a few hours earlier, beneath the glaring crystal chandeliers of the season's most suffocating social event. Lady Vivian stood near the edge of the crowded dance floor, her posture flawless, her expression giving away absolutely nothing. But beneath the calm facade of the 25-year-old spinster, her heart hammered a frantic, terrified rhythm. Her sharp eyes remained locked on the far corner of the room, where her younger sister Clara was laughing entirely too brightly. Clara was 18, radiant and dangerously naive. She possessed a romantic heart that believed every whispered compliment and trusted every handsome face. And the face currently smiling down at her belonged to Julian Thorne. Mr. Thorne was a man of devastating charm and ruined finances. He was a notorious fortune hunter, a predator who sought out innocent girls from respectable families to secure his own comfort. To society, he was merely a dashing gentleman. To Vivian, who had spent her adult life studying the hidden motives of the aristocracy, he was a disaster waiting to happen. Vivian moved through the crowded ballroom with the quiet grace of a woman accustomed to being overlooked. She had accepted her role as a spinster years ago, when the man she loved had quietly married a wealthier heiress. That betrayal had taught her a harsh but valuable lesson. Love was a transaction, and vulnerability was a weakness she could no longer afford. Her life now belonged to her family. She was the shield that protected them from their own foolishness. As she approached the alcove, Thorne leaned closer to Clara, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. Clara blushed deeply, her eyes wide with infatuation. Vivian stepped between them, her silk skirts rustling softly. "Clara, my dear," Vivian said, her voice smooth and perfectly polite. "Mother is feeling faint from the heat of the room. She requires your assistance immediately." Clara blinked, her romantic trance broken. "Oh, but Mr. Thorne was just telling me about his travels to Italy." "I am certain Italy will still exist tomorrow," Vivian replied, not breaking her pleasant smile. She turned her gaze to the gentleman. "Mr. Thorne, how fortunate to find you here, though I imagine you have many other acquaintances, to greet this evening." Thorne's smile did not reach his cold eyes. He recognized the insult, and he recognized the threat. But he also knew Vivian's family lacked the wealth and power to truly stop him. Her father was an impoverished earl who ignored his daughters, and Vivian was merely an unmarried sister with no authority. "Lady Vivian," Thorne murmured, bowing elegantly, "always a pleasure. Your sister is a rare delight in a room full of ordinary conversation. I look forward to our next meeting." He held Vivian's gaze for a second too long, offering a subtle, arrogant challenge. He was not going to retreat. He knew Clara was already caught in his snare. As Thorne walked away, Clara sighed dreamily. "You are terribly strict with him, Vivian. He is perfectly respectable." "He is a shark circling a very small boat, Clara," Vivian whispered fiercely, gripping her sister's arm and guiding her toward the safety of the chaperones. "You will not dance with him again. You will not accept his calls." "You cannot control everything I do," Clara shot back, her romantic pride wounded. "Just because you have given up on finding a husband does not mean I must live like a nun." The words stung, but Vivian did not let the pain show. Clara did not understand the danger. A ruined reputation meant poverty, isolation, and disgrace. Vivian knew that simply forbidding the match would only make Thorne more appealing to her rebellious sister. Words were no longer enough. Vivian needed a weapon. She needed a distraction so massive, so intimidating, that Julian Thorne would not dare approach her family, and society would completely forget Clara's foolish infatuation. She needed a power greater than scandal. Vivian turned her gaze back to the center of the ballroom, scanning the sea of polished gentlemen and glittering jewels. Her eyes finally settled on a man standing near the grand staircase, looking as though he wanted to set the entire building on fire. Sebastian, the Duke of Aldridge. He was a man of terrifying presence. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in immaculate dark evening wear, he commanded the room without speaking a single word. He was 32 years old and possessed a reputation that made grown men nervous. The public called him the Lone Wolf of London. He was known to be cold, ruthlessly pragmatic, and entirely uninterested in the delicate social games of the aristocracy. At that very moment, Sebastian was suffocating. He stood perfectly still as three different mothers attempted to push their terrified, giggling daughters into his path. His face was a mask of polite indifference, but internally his patience was fracturing. Sebastian hated London. He hated the crowded ballrooms, the heavy perfumes, and the endless, shallow conversations. Most of all, he hated the way people looked at him. They did not see a man, they saw a title. They saw a vast estate, a limitless fortune, and a solution to their family debts. Every smile offered to him was a calculation. Every dropped handkerchief was a trap. He had spent the last 5 years of his life rescuing his dukedom from the massive debts left behind by his careless predecessor. He had worked until his hands were calloused and his eyes ached from reading ledgers. He carried the weight of hundreds of tenants and vast, neglected lands. He had finally secured his family's future, but the victory had left him profoundly isolated. He had learned to lock his emotions away behind a fortress of ice, because the moment he showed warmth, someone tried to use it against him. "Your Grace," Lady Weston chirped, stepping directly in front of him and pulling a nervous blonde girl forward. "Have you met my daughter, Penelope? She plays the pianoforte beautifully and has a wonderful disposition for managing a large household." Sebastian looked down at the trembling girl. She looked as though she were being offered as a sacrifice to a dragon. "I am certain she is a marvel, Lady Weston," Sebastian said, his deep voice carrying a chilling edge of finality. "However, I have no need for piano music, and my household is already managed." Lady Weston's smile faltered, but before she could launch another assault, Sebastian simply turned and walked away. He did not care that he was being rude. He needed air. He needed silence. As he moved through the crowd, people instinctively parted for him. His severe expression kept further interruptions at bay. The upcoming weeks were already hanging heavily over his head. Tradition dictated that he host the grand mid-season ball at Aldridge House, a massive domestic undertaking that he had no idea how to manage. The thought of dealing with menus, guest lists, and decorations filled him with more dread than a business negotiation. He needed a shield. He needed someone to manage the social vultures and organize his chaotic household so he could return to the quiet of his study. But a duke could not simply hire a social shield. He would be hunted every single night of the season unless he did something drastic. Sebastian reached the edge of the ballroom and slipped through a set of heavy oak doors, stepping into the dim, quiet corridor that led to the host's private library. The silence was immediate and incredibly soothing. He unbuttoned his jacket, running a weary hand through his dark hair, letting the cold mask drop for just a moment. He walked into the shadows of the library, believing he was finally alone. He did not notice the soft rustle of silk following him down the corridor. Lady Vivian had watched the Duke's escape. She had seen the exhaustion in his shoulders and the irritation in his eyes when the matchmakers attacked. She possessed a brilliant, analytical mind, and as she stood in the hallway outside the library, all the pieces of a desperate, dangerous plan locked into place. He needed protection from society. She needed protection from a predator. Taking a slow, calming breath to steady her trembling hands, Vivian reached out and turned the brass handle of the library door. The heavy oak door clicked shut with a sound that seemed to echo in the cavernous room. Sebastian turned sharply, his dark brows drawing together in a fierce scowl. He expected to find a determined mother or a giggling debutante who had accidentally lost her way. Instead, he found a woman, standing perfectly still against the polished wood of the door. She did not giggle, and she did not look terrified of his glare. She simply met his eyes with a calm, assessing gaze. "You are trespassing in a private study, madam," Sebastian said, his voice a low, warning rumble. "And you are hiding, your grace," Vivian replied smoothly. Sebastian paused, genuinely taken aback. People did not speak to him with such quiet authority. He studied her in the dim light. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk, elegant, but entirely lacking the excessive ruffles and lace favored by the young girls in the ballroom. She was older, composed, and possessed a quiet, striking beauty that seemed to radiate from her sharp intelligence rather than mere physical perfection. "I am Lady Vivian," she said, stepping further into the room, "and I have not come to drop a handkerchief or compliment your estates. I have come to offer you a business arrangement." Sebastian leaned against the edge of a heavy mahogany desk, crossing his arms over his broad chest. His irritation was slowly being replaced by a cautious curiosity. "A business arrangement? Are you selling horses, Lady Vivian?" "I am selling peace, your grace," Vivian said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I watched you in the ballroom. You are surrounded by vultures, and you are exhausted by it. Furthermore, the entire society knows you are obligated to host the mid-season ball at Aldridge House in 3 weeks, a task I suspect you would rather trade for a term in a military prison." A small, humorless smile touched the corner of Sebastian's mouth. She was remarkably observant. "Continue." "My younger sister is currently being charmed by Julian Thorne," Vivian explained, her voice losing a fraction of its cool detachment, revealing a fierce protective edge. "He is a fortune hunter who will ruin her. She is too naive to listen to reason, and my family lacks the influence to frighten him away. If I merely forbid it, she will elope." "And what does this have to do with me?" Sebastian asked, though he was beginning to see the shape of her strategy. "I propose a fake courtship," Vivian stated clearly, holding his intense gaze without flinching. "If the formidable Duke of Aldridge suddenly shows an exclusive, undeniable interest in me, my family will instantly become the center of London's attention. Julian Thorne is a coward. He operates in the shadows. He will not dare approach a family under your direct, public protection. In exchange, I will be your permanent shield for the remainder of the season. When a mother approaches you, I will intercept her. When a debutante demands your attention, I will demand it first. And, most importantly, I will organize, manage, and execute your mid-season ball to absolute perfection." Sebastian remained silent, his mind working rapidly. It was an outrageous proposal. It was scandalous, dangerous, and entirely logical. He looked at the woman standing before him. She was asking for his protection, but she was not pleading. She was negotiating as an equal. She did not care about his title or his wealth. She cared about her sister. It was the first time in years someone had looked at him and seen a solution that did not involve stealing his fortune. "A fake courtship requires convincing society that I actually enjoy your company," Sebastian noted, pushing off the desk and taking a slow step toward her. His towering height usually intimidated people into stepping back, but Vivian held her ground. "I am exceptionally good at pretending, your grace," Vivian said softly. "And when the season ends?" he asked, stopping just a few feet away. "We announce a mutual, amicable separation," Vivian replied, though her heart gave a sudden, strange flutter at his proximity. "My sister will be safe, your ball will be over, and we will part ways with our reputations intact." Sebastian studied her face, searching for a trap, for the familiar greed he saw in everyone else. He found only determination, and a quiet, shared exhaustion. He held out his large, calloused hand. "You have a deal, Lady Vivian." She placed her gloved hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and shockingly grounding. "Thank you, Your Grace." "If we are to convince the ballroom beyond that door," Sebastian murmured, his voice dropping to a register that sent a tiny shiver down her spine, "you must call me Sebastian." Vivian swallowed the sudden dryness in her throat. "Sebastian, and I am Vivian." "Very well, Vivian," he said, stepping beside her and offering his arm. "Let us go frighten Julian Thorne." The heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung open, and the overwhelming noise of the London season spilled into the corridor. Vivian placed her hand on Sebastian's arm, and the moment she did, the reality of her dangerous gamble crashed over her. Beneath the fine black fabric of his evening coat, his arm was solid muscle. He did not walk with the lazy, affected stroll of a typical aristocrat. He moved with deliberate, predatory grace. As they stepped into the brilliant light of the chandeliers, Vivian forced her posture to remain perfectly relaxed, though her pulse was racing. It took exactly 10 seconds for the first person to notice. Lady Weston, who had been loudly complaining about the heat, stopped mid-sentence. Her mouth fell open, the silence spread like a dropped stone in a pond, rippling outward in a wave of whispers, turned heads and widened eyes. The formidable Duke of Aldridge, who had spent the entire evening glaring at anyone who approached him, was voluntarily walking arm in arm with the Earl's spinster daughter. Sebastian felt the weight of 100 stares, but for the first time in 5 years, the attention did not suffocate him. Vivian walked beside him with such serene, unquestionable elegance that she seemed to absorb the pressure of the room. She did not gloat, nor did she shrink from the stares. She simply belonged there. "Do not look at the matchmakers," Vivian murmured softly, her lips barely moving. "Look only at me, and smile as if I have just said something mildly amusing." Sebastian looked down at her. The soft glow of the candlelight caught the emerald silk of her gown and the quiet confidence in her dark eyes. To his complete surprise, he did not have to fake the small smile that touched his lips. "You are enjoying this." "I am enjoying the absolute panic on Lady Weston's face," Vivian corrected, allowing a genuine, musical laugh to escape. The sound of her laughter, combined with the Duke's focused attention, was a devastating social blow. Across the room, Julian Thorne froze, his charming smile dissolving into an expression of sheer panic. He looked at Clara, then at the towering Duke, standing beside Clara's fiercely protective older sister. Thorne slowly took a step back, melting into the crowd and moving swiftly toward the exit. The first part of the plan was a complete success. Then the orchestra began to play a waltz. "If we are to sell this deception," Sebastian said, his voice a low vibration that she felt as much as heard, "we must dance." Vivian hesitated for a fraction of a second. A waltz was intimate. It required a closeness that went far beyond walking arm in arm. But society was watching, and hesitation would ruin the illusion. Of course. He led her to the center of the floor. When he turned to face her, the rest of the crowded room seemed to blur into the background. Sebastian placed his large hand firmly on the curve of her waist. The heat of his palm radiated through the layers of her silk gown, sending a sudden, startling jolt of awareness straight to her chest. Vivian placed her hand on his broad shoulder, suddenly profoundly aware of the difference in their sizes, and the immense, controlled power resting just beneath his calm exterior. They stepped into the music, moving together with a shocking fluidity. They had never danced, yet they moved as if they had spent years learning each other's rhythm. The physical proximity was overwhelming. Vivian could smell the clean scent of soap and cedar on his skin. She had spent years observing men from a safe distance, analyzing their flaws and motives. Now, held tightly in the arms of the most intimidating man in London, her analytical mind completely failed her. Sebastian stared down into her eyes, feeling a strange tightening in his chest. He had agreed to a business arrangement with a practical, intelligent woman. He had not anticipated how perfectly she would fit into his arms, or how the delicate warmth of her hand in his would make him completely forget the surrounding crowd. "You are trembling," Sebastian murmured quietly, his thumb brushing a microscopic, comforting stroke against her waist. "I am merely adjusting to the altitude, Your Grace," Vivian whispered, trying to maintain her quick wit despite the breathlessness creeping into her voice. "It is quite a long way up to meet your eyes." The sincere, deep chuckle that rumbled in Sebastian's chest drew another wave of shocked gasps from the watching society. The Duke of Aldridge was laughing. He was dancing. He was entirely captivated. As the final notes of the waltz faded, Sebastian did not immediately step back. He kept his hand resting on her waist for 1 second longer than propriety allowed, his dark eyes searching hers, looking for the same sudden, jarring confusion he felt. Vivian held his gaze, the safe, predictable walls of her spinsterhood cracking under the weight of his attention. The arrangement was supposed to be a shield, a practical lie to protect her family. But as he finally offered his arm to lead her off the floor, Vivian realized with a quiet sense of terror that the heat lingering on her skin was dangerously, undeniably real. 3 days later, the quiet sanctuary of the Aldridge House Library was completely transformed. Sebastian stood in the doorway, staring in quiet disbelief. For years, the massive mahogany desk at the center of the room had been a battlefield of chaotic ledgers, unpaid invoices, and demanding correspondence. It was the physical manifestation of the crushing debt his uncle had left behind, a secret burden Sebastian had fought to manage entirely alone. Now, the chaos was gone. Lady Vivian sat behind his desk, the afternoon sunlight catching the rich brown waves of her neatly pinned hair. She had removed her gloves to work, and her slender fingers moved swiftly across a ledger, a pencil marking small, precise corrections. Beside her, 3 perfectly stacked piles of paper had replaced the mountains of anxiety that usually haunted his days. "I hope you do not mind, Sebastian," Vivian said, not looking up from the column of numbers. She used his given name seamlessly now, a necessary habit to maintain their public deception. "I came to finalize the guest list for the ball, but I found your household accounts mixed in with the invitations. Your steward is stealing from you." Sebastian slowly walked into the room, closing the heavy doors behind him. "He is not stealing. He is merely incompetent. He is charging you for premium wax candles and purchasing cheap tallow, pocketing the difference," Vivian corrected mildly, turning the page. "I have already drafted a letter of dismissal. You only need to sign it." He walked around the desk and looked down at the neatly organized ledgers. He expected to feel defensive. The financial ruin of the Aldridge estate was his greatest shame, a vulnerability he guarded fiercely from the judgmental eyes of high society. To the world, he was limitlessly wealthy. To him, the title was a heavy chain dragging him underwater. "You looked at the estate ledgers," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Vivian finally stopped writing and looked up. She saw the tension in his broad shoulders and the guarded shadow in his dark eyes. She did not offer him pity, nor did she look at him with the false reverence he despised. Instead, she offered him quiet, absolute understanding. "I saw 5 years of relentless, exhausting work," Vivian said softly. "I saw a man who inherited a sinking ship and bailed the water out with his bare hands. You have saved the southern farms, stabilized the tenant rents, and nearly cleared the crown debts. It is a brilliant piece of management." Sebastian stared at her, the defensive walls around his chest suddenly cracking. No one had ever seen the effort, no one had ever understood the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, or the sheer terror of failing the hundreds of families relying on his land. The society mothers only saw his grand carriage and his empty title. Vivian saw him. "It has not been easy," he admitted, his voice rougher, quieter than usual. He pulled a chair close to the desk and sat down heavily, resting his elbows on his knees. If the mid-season ball is not a flawless display of wealth, my creditors will panic. But every pound spent on champagne is a pound I cannot spend repairing the winter roofs in the northern villages. Then we shall be clever, Vivienne said, picking up her pencil again, her tone practical and incredibly comforting. We will serve the expensive champagne only during the first hour, when the guests are paying attention. We will use the estate's own hothouse flowers instead of importing orchids, saving you £200, which will cover the winter roofs. The society will praise your elegant restraint, and your creditors will remain calm. Sebastian looked at her hands, observing the ink smudge on her index finger. A strange, profound warmth began to spread through his chest, entirely unrelated to physical attraction. It was the overwhelming relief of no longer being alone. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, searching her face. "Our arrangement requires you to smile at me in public. It does not require you to save my estate." "You are protecting my sister from ruin," Vivienne replied, holding his gaze with a gentle, fierce loyalty. "The least I can do is protect your northern tenants from the rain." A silent understanding settled over the dusty library. The transactional boundary of their fake courtship had irrevocably shifted. They were no longer merely using each other to survive the season. They were becoming a team. By the time they finished the budgets, the sun had dipped below the London skyline, casting long, violet shadows across the manicured lawns. Sebastian refused to let Vivienne take a hired carriage back to her father's modest townhouse. He ordered his private carriage brought to the front steps. The interior of the ducal carriage was intimate, smelling faintly of old leather and the clean cedar scent that Vivienne had come to associate entirely with him. As the horses pulled away from the grand estate, the rhythmic sway of the wheels created a quiet, insulated world just for the two of them. The street lamps cast flickering golden light across Sebastian's face. He watched her from the opposite seat. She looked tired, the strain of managing her family and now his household showing in the delicate lines around her eyes. "You take care of everyone," Sebastian observed quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Your sister, your parents, and now a chaotic duke. Who takes care of you, Vivienne?" She looked out the window, her defenses rising instinctively. "I do not require care. I am perfectly capable of managing my own life." "That is not what I asked," he pressed gently. He leaned forward slightly, closing the physical distance between them in the small cabin. "Society calls you a spinster by choice. But you understand duty and sacrifice too well to have chosen loneliness without a reason." Vivienne traced the seam of her glove, hesitating. She had never spoken of her past to anyone outside her family. But sitting in the dim carriage with a man who had trusted her with his greatest burden, keeping her own secrets, felt wrong. "When I was 20, Vivienne began, her voice soft and painfully steady, "I was engaged to the son of a viscount. It was not a formal announcement, but the promises were made. We read poetry, we walked in the gardens, we planned a quiet life. Then a minor heiress arrived in London. She had £20,000. My father had nothing." Sebastian's jaw tightened. He could already see the end of the tragic common story. "He broke the promise in a single afternoon," she continued, offering a sad, empty smile. "He explained that love could not repair his family's leaking roof. He chose the money. I realized then that a woman without a fortune is merely a temporary amusement. I decided I would rather be an independent spinster than wait for another man to weigh my worth against a bag of gold." A heavy, dangerous silence filled the carriage. Sebastian felt a surge of cold fury toward a man he had never met. The idea that someone had held Vivienne's brilliant, loyal heart in his hands and discarded it for something as vulgar as coin disgusted him. "He was a fool," Sebastian stated, his voice a low, absolute growl. "And he was weak." Vivienne looked away, fighting the sudden burn of tears in her eyes. "He was practical." "No," Sebastian countered fiercely. The carriage jolted over the cobblestones, and he used the movement to shift across the small space, sitting on the bench directly beside her. The sudden heat of his large frame pressing against her side made her breath catch. He reached out, slowly removing the glove from her left hand. The intimacy of the gesture, skin sliding against fabric in the dim light, felt more shocking than a kiss. He held her bare hand in his large, warm palm. "Practicality is repairing a roof with your own hands," Sebastian said, his dark eyes locking onto hers, intense and completely unguarded. "Choosing a fortune over a woman like you is a tragic failure of judgment. You are worth more than any estate in England." The words struck the deepest, oldest wound in Vivienne's heart. He was not flattering her. The ferocious sincerity in his tone made the old pain fracture and begin to dissolve. She looked at their joined hands, feeling a terrifying sense of safety wash over her. She wanted to lean her head against his shoulder. She wanted to let him carry the weight for just one night. But a small, rational voice in her mind screamed a warning. This was temporary. Once the ball was over and Clara was safe, Sebastian would retreat to his northern estates, and she would return to her quiet, forgotten life. Believing in his protection would only break her heart a second time. Vivienne slowly, reluctantly, pulled her hand back. "We are almost at my street, Sebastian." Sebastian felt the loss of her touch immediately. He saw the fear flash in her eyes and understood it perfectly. He had spent years pushing people away to protect himself. He recognized the defense mechanism. He did not push her. He simply nodded, moving back to his side of the carriage, giving her the physical space she desperately needed. But as the carriage came to a halt outside her door, neither of them moved right away. The air between them was thick with unspoken words and heavy, dangerous longing. The trust had taken root, deep and irrevocable, changing the rules of their dangerous game forever. A week before the grand mid-season ball, the massive ballroom of Aldridge House was finally ready. The heavy velvet curtains had been drawn back to reveal tall, arched windows overlooking the moonlit gardens. The newly polished marble floor gleamed like glass beneath the light of unlit crystal chandeliers. The room was breathtaking, silent, and entirely empty, save for the two people standing near the center of the vast space. Vivienne held a small notebook, checking her final list in the dim light provided by a few wall sconces. "The musicians will be positioned on the elevated balcony," she noted, her voice echoing softly across the marble. "The caterers have confirmed the champagne will flow exclusively during the first hour, as we agreed. The floral arrangements arrive on Thursday." Sebastian stood a few feet away, listening to her practical, efficient summary. He wore a simple white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, having abandoned his formal coat hours ago. He did not care about the floral arrangements or the caterers. His dark eyes were fixed entirely on Vivienne. Over the past 2 weeks, their fake courtship had become the most real, vital part of his life. He looked for her the moment he woke. He sought her sharp intellect when making decisions about his estate. He found himself smiling at the memory of her laughter during long, tedious meetings. The cold, isolated fortress he had built around his heart was entirely dismantled, brick by a woman who simply refused to be intimidated by him. Vivienne snapped the small notebook shut and looked up, expecting him to approve the schedule. Instead, she found him watching her with an intensity that made the air in her lungs vanish. "There is one final detail we have not practiced," Sebastian said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. He took a slow step toward her. "Tradition dictates that the host must open the ball with the woman he is courting. Society will be watching us very closely, Vivienne. We cannot afford a single misstep." "I am perfectly capable of dancing a waltz, Sebastian," Vivienne replied, though her pulse had already begun a frantic, treacherous rhythm. "I know you are," he murmured, stopping just inches from her. He gently took the notebook from her fingers and tossed it carelessly onto a nearby velvet chair. But this is not merely a dance. We must convince 300 desperate mothers and a ballroom full of cynical aristocrats that I am completely, irrevocably captivated by you." He did not give her time to argue. Sebastian placed his large, warm hand firmly on her waist, drawing her flush against his solid chest. The sudden, intense physical contact sent a jolt of pure heat straight through her body. Vivian gasped softly, instinctively resting her hands on his broad shoulders. There was no orchestra playing. The only sound in the massive room was the quiet, uneven rhythm of their breathing. Sebastian began to move, leading her into the sweeping steps of a waltz in the profound silence. He held her much closer than the rules of polite society allowed, his grip on her waist possessing a fierce, possessive strength. Vivienne followed his lead flawlessly, her silk skirts swishing softly against his trousers with every turn. Without the distraction of music or a crowded room, the dance became an agonizingly intimate conversation. Vivienne looked up into his dark eyes and saw the heavy, undeniable hunger there. He was not looking at a business partner, he was looking at a woman he desired deeply. The protective walls she had built over years of spinsterhood crumbled into dust. She realized, with a terrifying clarity, that she no longer wanted to be independent. She wanted to be his. She wanted this quiet strength, this brilliant, complex man, for the rest of her life. Sebastian's hand slid slowly from her waist, moving upward to trace the line of her spine, sending a shiver cascading over her skin. He stopped dancing, though he did not release her. They stood locked together in the center of the shadows, the silence wrapping tightly around them. He lowered his head, his face coming dangerously close to hers. Vivienne could feel the warmth of his breath against her cheek. Her eyes fluttered shut, her fingers curling tightly into the fabric of his shirt. She waited, her heart pounding against her ribs, entirely ready to surrender to the passion that had been building between them for weeks. Sebastian's lips brushed the corner of her mouth, a touch so light and yet so devastating it made her entire body tremble. He wanted to claim her, he wanted to ask her to stay in this house, by his side, permanently. But before he could capture her lips completely, the heavy strike of the grandfather clock in the hallway echoed through the walls, breaking the spell. Vivienne's eyes snapped open, reality crashing back over her. She took a ragged breath and stepped back, her hands dropping to her sides. She was terrified of the power he suddenly held over her. If she gave him her heart now, and the illusion ended next week, she would not survive the loss a second time. "The steps are flawless, Sebastian," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "We will convince them." Sebastian let his hands fall, a flash of deep frustration crossing his face, but he saw the fear in her eyes and forced himself to step back. "Yes," he agreed quietly, his voice tight with restrained emotion, "we will." The fragile, beautiful illusion shattered the following afternoon. Vivienne was sitting in the Aldridge House library, finalizing the seating arrangements for the dinner, when a footman entered, carrying a small, sealed envelope. He informed her that a boy from the streets had delivered it to the service door, specifically requesting it be given directly to Lady Vivienne. A cold sense of dread washed over her as she broke the cheap wax seal. She unfolded the coarse paper and recognized the sharp, arrogant handwriting immediately. Julian Thorne. "Lady Vivienne," the note read, "Your duke is a terrifying shield, but even a duke cannot protect a ruined woman. I possess a rather passionate, handwritten letter from your sweet sister, Clara. She promised me her heart and her fortune. If you do not meet me at the Blackwood Gardens by 4 o'clock tomorrow to discuss a financial settlement, I will deliver this letter to the society papers. The scandal will destroy your family, and how unfortunate it will be for the pristine Duke of Aldridge to be publicly tied to such a disgraceful, ruined name." Vivienne stopped breathing. The paper trembled violently in her hands. Thorne had lost Clara, but he had kept a weapon. A compromising letter from an unmarried girl was enough to destroy her completely. But it was the second part of the threat that made Vivienne's blood run ice cold. Sebastian. He had spent 5 years working in the shadows, fighting to repair his family's legacy. He had trusted her to help him save his estate. If Thorn released that letter, the scandal would not only ruin Clara, it would splash directly onto Sebastian, turning the Duke's name into a subject of vulgar gossip. His creditors would panic, his reputation would be stained by association with her foolish family. She could not let the man she loved be destroyed by her sister's mistake. The library doors opened, and Sebastian walked in, bringing the scent of the crisp autumn wind with him. He had just returned from a meeting with his stewards, and his face immediately softened when he saw her. He walked toward the desk, the lingering tension of their near kiss the night before hanging heavily, warmly between them. But then he saw her pale face and the way she quickly crushed a piece of paper into the pocket of her gown. "Vivienne?" Sebastian stopped, his protective instincts instantly flaring. "What is wrong? You look as though you have seen a ghost." Vivienne forced her spine perfectly straight. She had to protect him, and to protect him, she could not involve him. If he knew about the blackmail, his fierce pride would demand he crush Thorn himself, placing him directly in the center of the scandal. She had to face the fortune hunter alone, buy the letter back with whatever meager savings she possessed, and keep Sebastian's name clean. "It is nothing," Vivienne said, her voice completely devoid of the warmth they had shared for weeks. "Merely a frustrating message from the dressmaker. Clara is being difficult about her gown." Sebastian narrowed his eyes, his sharp gaze cutting through her lie instantly. He stepped closer, reaching out to gently touch her arm. "Do not lie to me. What was in that letter?" Vivienne pulled her arm away before his fingers could brush her sleeve. The physical rejection hit him like a physical blow. "I assure you, it is a minor domestic issue," Vivienne said, standing up and organizing her completely tidy papers just to avoid looking into his eyes. She built the cold spinster wall back up, brick by brick. "I must return home early today. There are matters I must attend to without your assistance, Your Grace." Sebastian went completely still. The use of his formal title was a deliberate, brutal weapon. It severed the profound intimacy they had built and threw him back into the cold role of a business partner. "Your Grace," Sebastian repeated softly, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He stared at her, deeply wounded. He thought she had finally seen him as a man she could trust. He thought the barriers were gone. Now, at the first sign of trouble, she was shutting him out entirely, treating him like a stranger she was merely using for social convenience. "If you require my carriage, I will have it brought around," Sebastian said, his voice dropping into a flat, icy register that he had not used with her since the day they met. "That will not be necessary. I will hire a cab," Vivienne replied, finally looking up. The pain in his dark eyes almost broke her resolve, but she clamped down on her emotions. "Good afternoon, Sebastian." She walked past him, leaving the library in a rustle of silk. Sebastian stood alone in the silence, the cold isolation of his life rushing back in, heavier and more suffocating than ever before. The damp autumn wind swept through the desolate pathways of Blackwood Gardens, chilling Vivienne through the thin wool of her cloak. It was not a place a respectable woman visited alone, especially not as the afternoon light began to fade into a grey, oppressive dusk. She stood near a crumbling stone fountain, her hands tightly clutching a small velvet reticule that contained every pound she had managed to save over the last 5 years. It was a meager sum, barely enough to cover a month of rent in a decent district, but she hoped it would be enough to satisfy a desperate man. Footsteps crunched on the gravel path. Julian Thorn emerged from the shadows of the overgrown oak trees, wearing a mocking, victorious smile. "Lady Vivienne," Thorn drawled, stopping a few feet away, "I must admit, I am surprised. I half expected you to bring your terrifying Duke with you, but you are too proud for that, aren't you? You would rather ruin yourself than let him see the dirt on your family's hands." Vivian lifted her chin, refusing to let him see her tremble. "I have brought what I can, Mr. Thorne. Give me Clara's letter, take the money, and leave London. If you remain, I will ensure every family in society knows you are a blackmailer." Thorne laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "A spinster's threat. How terrifying. I do not want your pocket money, Vivian. I want £10,000. If your family cannot pay it, I am sure the Duke of Aldridge will gladly pay to keep his name completely untainted by his association with you." "Sebastian has nothing to do with this," Vivian said, her voice dropping into a fierce, desperate whisper. "He has everything to do with this," Thorne countered, taking a step closer. "He is the only reason I am asking for 10,000. So, you will go to him, you will beg for the money, and—" The sound of heavy, rapid footsteps interrupted Thorne's threat. From the thick fog rolling across the garden path, a tall, broad-shouldered figure appeared. He did not walk. He stalked forward with the terrifying, predatory focus of a man ready to commit murder. Sebastian had not bothered to wear a coat. His white shirt was stark against the gloom, and his dark eyes were locked entirely on Julian Thorne. Thorne stumbled backward, the arrogant smirk instantly vanishing from his face, replaced by sheer, primal terror. Vivian gasped, her heart dropping into her stomach. "Sebastian, no! You should not be here." Sebastian ignored her completely. He closed the distance in seconds, grabbing the lapels of Thorne's expensive coat and slamming the smaller man violently against the cold stone of the fountain. The impact echoed sharply in the quiet garden. "You sent a threat to my home," Sebastian said, his voice a low, lethal whisper that was far more terrifying than a shout. "You threatened a woman under my protection." "Your Grace, I meant no offense," Thorne stammered, his face draining of color as he struggled against the Duke's crushing grip. "It was a simple business transaction." "I am a businessman, Thorne," Sebastian replied, his jaw tight with restrained fury. "Which is why I spent the last 3 hours visiting your creditors. I purchased your gambling debts from 3 different gentlemen this afternoon. You owe me £15,000. Thorne stopped struggling, his eyes widening in absolute horror. He was entirely trapped. "You will hand over the letter," Sebastian continued, his voice cold and absolute. "You will board a ship to the continent by midnight, and you will never set foot in England again. If you do, I will have you thrown into a debtor's prison and leave you there to rot. Do we understand each other?" Thorne frantically reached into his breast pocket with trembling fingers, pulling out the folded, sealed letter. He practically shoved it into Sebastian's hand. Sebastian released him, stepping back with a look of pure disgust. Thorne did not say another word. He scrambled away from the fountain and ran toward the garden gates, disappearing into the fog. The silence that fell over the garden was heavy and suffocating. Sebastian looked down at the letter in his hand, confirming the seal was intact. He turned slowly to face Vivian. The violent fury in his eyes had faded, replaced by a profound, hollow pain that struck Vivian harder than any physical blow. "How did you know?" she whispered, tears finally blurring her vision. "I saw the seal on the note you received in the library," Sebastian answered, his voice completely flat. "And I followed your cab, because I knew you were walking into a trap." He held the letter out to her. Vivian took it, her fingers brushing against his, but he instantly pulled his hand back, stepping away to create a wide, unbearable distance between them. "I did it to protect you, Sebastian," Vivian pleaded, the tears spilling over her cheeks. "If he released it, the scandal would have ruined the season. Your creditors would have panicked. I could not let my family's mistakes destroy the estate you worked so hard to save." Sebastian looked at her, his expression hardening into a mask of pure ice. "You think I care about the season? You think I care what society whispers about my name? You have a duty to your title." "My title is a burden," Sebastian interrupted, his voice finally cracking with raw emotion. "For weeks, I believed you were the only person in London who understood that. I thought you saw the man beneath the duty. But you did not. He looked away, staring into the dark trees. The betrayal in his posture was absolute. You looked at me and saw a reputation to protect, just like everyone else, Sebastian said quietly. You did not trust me to fight for you. You viewed me as a fragile piece of glass, a convenient tool for your arrangement, instead of a partner who would tear this city apart to keep you safe. That is not true, Vivian cried, stepping forward, desperate to close the distance. Sebastian held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. Keep the letter, Lady Vivian. The arrangement remains. We will host the ball, we will smile for the society, and the following morning you will be entirely free of me. He turned and walked away into the fog, leaving her standing entirely alone by the fountain. The crushing weight of her independence had never felt so much like a prison. 3 days later, Aldridge House was a blazing beacon of light and music, a flawless triumph of social engineering. The mid-season ball was magnificent. The estate-grown floral arrangements drew gasps of admiration from the most critical duchesses, and the precise timing of the vintage champagne left the aristocrats praising the Duke's elegant hospitality. Vivien's careful planning had saved his finances and elevated his reputation to legendary heights. It was the most successful night of Sebastian's life, and he was completely miserable. He stood near the edge of the dance floor, watching the swirling colors of the silk gowns. He performed his duty perfectly. He had opened the ball with Vivian, dancing the waltz they had practiced in the empty room. But this time there was no breathless tension, there was no whispered banter. She had been light in his arms, but emotionally she was a ghost. They had moved together like two perfect mechanical dolls, their faces frozen in polite smiles while their hearts broke in silence. Since the dance, Vivian had remained on the opposite side of the room, diligently managing the caterers and speaking politely with the chaperones. Clara was dancing happily with a respectable young captain, entirely oblivious to the fact that her older sister had sacrificed her own heart to secure that safety. You have successfully intimidated everyone in London, Sebastian. Sebastian turned slightly to see his aunt, the Dowager Marchioness of Aldridge, stepping to his side. Aunt Augusta was a sharp-eyed woman with silver hair and a terrifying lack of patience for foolishness. I am merely observing my guests, Aunt Augusta, Sebastian replied stiffly. Augusta followed his gaze directly across the room to where Vivian stood alone near a pillar. You are glaring at a woman who organized a miracle in your chaotic home. She saved your estate, she protected your dignity, and she looks as though she is attending a funeral. Sebastian tightened his jaw, refusing to look away from Vivian. Our arrangement concludes tonight. It was always meant to be temporary. Do not insult my intelligence, Augusta snapped quietly. I saw the way you looked at her during the waltz, and I see the way you look at her now. You are letting her walk away because your pride is bruised. She did not trust me, Sebastian said, the deep hurt bleeding through his cold facade. She is a woman who has spent her entire life carrying the burdens of everyone around her because no one else was strong enough to do it, Augusta corrected firmly. She did not keep her secret because she lacked trust, Sebastian. She kept it because she does not know how to let someone else carry the weight. If you want her, you must stop waiting for her to be perfect and start proving to her that she is safe. The words struck Sebastian with the force of a physical blow. He stared at his aunt, the heavy, blinding walls of his own pride suddenly crumbling. He had been so focused on his own wound, the fear of being used, that he had completely failed to understand hers. Vivian had not shut him out to manipulate him. She had shut him out because she was terrified of ruining him. It was an act of profound, selfless love, and he had punished her for it. Across the room, Vivian handed a final list of instructions to the head butler. The ball was ending. The carriages were being called. Her duty was complete. Clara was safe. Sebastian was victorious. It was time to leave. Vivian turned away from the brilliant lights of the ballroom. unable to bear the sight of Sebastian's broad shoulders anymore. The tears she had been fighting all evening finally burned hot in her eyes. She slipped through a side door, escaping into the quiet, shadowed corridor that led to his private study. She needed a moment to breathe, to gather the shattered pieces of her composure before she stepped into the carriage and out of his life forever. She realized, with a devastating clarity, that her fierce independence had been nothing but a shield against being hurt again. And in using that shield, she had driven away the only man she had ever truly wanted. She pushed open the heavy oak door of the library, the quiet sanctuary where they had spent hours laughing over ledgers and sharing their deepest fears. The room was dark, lit only by the embers in the fireplace. She walked toward the desk, resting her hand on the polished mahogany, preparing to say a silent goodbye to the brief, beautiful illusion they had built. Then, the heavy door clicked shut behind her. Vivian spun around, her heart leaping into her throat as the heavy silk of her emerald gown brushed against the desk. Sebastian stood in the doorway, the warm glow of the hallway silhouetting his tall, broad frame. For a long moment, neither of them moved. He slowly turned the brass key in the lock, the click echoing sharply in the quiet room, sealing them inside their private sanctuary. He had abandoned his formal coat, looking exactly as he had on those long afternoons when they had worked side by side to save his estate. He walked slowly toward her, stopping only a few feet away. The fierce, intimidating mask of the Duke of Aldridge was entirely gone, leaving only the raw, exhausted vulnerability of the man beneath. "The carriages are leaving," Sebastian said quietly, his voice raspy from a night of forced pleasantries. "The society is calling it the most magnificent ball of the decade. Your plan was a complete success, Vivian." "I am glad," Vivian whispered, her voice trembling despite her desperate attempt to maintain her composure. "Your creditors will be satisfied. Your estate is secure." "My estate is a building of stone and wood," Sebastian replied, taking another slow step closer. He looked down at her, his dark eyes searching her face with an intensity that made it impossible for her to look away. "It means absolutely nothing if the woman who brought it back to life walks out of my door tonight." Vivian closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. The wall of her fierce independence finally shattered completely. "I was terrified, Sebastian. I was not afraid of Julian Thorne. I was afraid of what the scandal would do to you. I thought I had to be strong enough to fix my family's mistakes alone, because if I could not, I believed I would have nothing of value to offer you." "Look at me," Sebastian commanded softly. Vivian opened her eyes. Sebastian reached out, gently cupping her face in his large, warm hands. His thumbs carefully brushed the tears away from her cheeks. The touch was so tender, so full of absolute reverence, that a choked sob escaped her throat. "Do you truly believe your value to me lies in organizing ledgers and shielding me from society?" Sebastian asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I let my own bruised pride blind me. I was so afraid of being used again that I failed to see what you were actually doing. You were not shutting me out, Vivian. You were sacrificing yourself to protect me, but I do not want your protection from a distance. I have spent my entire life carrying the burdens of my family," she whispered, leaning her face into the warmth of his palm. "I do not know how to stop. I do not know how to be weak." "You are the strongest woman I have ever known," Sebastian countered fiercely. "You do not have to stop caring for the people you love. You only have to let me help you carry the weight. Let me be your partner, Vivian. Not a shield, not a duke, just a man who wants to spend the rest of his life making certain you never have to face the dark alone." The absolute sincerity in his words struck the deepest, oldest wound in her heart, healing it instantly. The fear of being abandoned, the belief that she was only worthy if she was useful, dissolved into the quiet warmth of the library. Vivian lifted her hands, resting them over his wrists. She felt the steady, strong beat of his pulse beneath her fingers. "I love you, Sebastian. I think I have loved you since the moment you scowled at me in this very room." A sound that was half laugh, half sigh, escaped Sebastian's chest. The agonizing tension that had gripped him for days finally broke. He lowered his head and captured her lips. The kiss was not hesitant or gentle. It was a desperate, fierce claiming, full of all the longing and terror they had held back for weeks. Vivienne gasped softly against his mouth, her hands sliding up to tangle in the dark hair at the nape of his neck. Sebastian's arms wrapped tightly around her waist, pulling her flush against his solid chest, lifting her slightly off the floor. The physical contact was no longer a dangerous gamble or a performance for society. It was an absolute surrender. The heat that had sparked between them on the dance floor finally ignited into a consuming, beautiful fire. Sebastian kissed her until her head spun, pouring every ounce of his devotion, his gratitude, and his deeply guarded heart into the embrace. When they finally parted, both of them were breathless. Sebastian rested his forehead against hers, keeping his arms securely wrapped around her, unwilling to let her go for even a second. "The fake courtship is officially over," Sebastian murmured against her lips, his breath warm on her skin. "A pity," Vivienne replied, a breathless spark of her old wit returning, bringing a brilliant smile to her face. "It was remarkably effective. Lady Weston looked positively terrified of me this evening." Sebastian chuckled, a deep, rich sound that filled the quiet room. "Then we shall simply replace it with a real marriage. Tomorrow morning, I will call upon your father. And then, my brilliant, beautiful Vivienne, you are going to help me manage the rest of my life." Vivienne looked up into his dark eyes and saw the complete absence of coldness, replaced entirely by a profound, enduring warmth. She was no longer the forgotten spinster managing crises in the shadows. She was the chosen partner of the lone wolf of London, and he was no longer alone. "I would be honored, Sebastian," she whispered softly. He pulled her into his arms once more as the dying embers in the fireplace cast a golden glow across the room. Outside the heavy oak doors, the chaotic society of London continued its endless games. But inside the quiet sanctuary of the library, two wounded protectors had finally stopped fighting, discovering that the safest place in the entire world was simply in each other's arms. Thank you for joining us for this emotional journey into the heart of Victorian London. We hope Lady Vivienne and Sebastian's story brought a moment of comfort, warmth, and romance to your day. If you enjoyed this tale of shared burdens and unexpected love, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more historical romance audiobooks. We have many more stories waiting to be told, where wounded hearts finally discover their safe harbor. Until next time, take a deep breath, hold on to hope, and we look forward to sharing another beautiful romance with you very soon.